Open Tobias Harris, and Tobias drills it! Sixers up one!
Embiid fakes, Embiid down the lane!
What is going on, guys, and welcome back to the Pick Swap Media YouTube channel, or for those of you tuning in via the airwaves to Fox Sports The Gambler. Appreciate each and every one of you tuning in wherever you are. We have some exciting news to get into today. With me to break it all down, I got my guy James Birrane. James, what kind of mood are we in? We ready to celebrate right now?
Maybe not ready to celebrate quite yet, but definitely in a great mood. It was really such a momentous swing from the last time you and I talked to where we are now, how things have changed, and no matter how this turns out, no matter what will come of this, what an amazing happening that this was. Paul George, the biggest free agent out there, the best player that's changed teams so far in this offseason, is now a 76er for just absorbing right into the cap space. So can't complain at all.
I think people are still underselling the slight likelihood of Daryl Morey managing to land this plane. The way for him to maneuver from a salary cap perspective, to talk to Tyrese Maxey, to have the belief in this Sixers organization, to delay his extension until after, because that max slot is not even available. If, like most NBA players, Maxey would have been committed to signing that extension last offseason, they can't even make this move. That's just the possibility of this being an option. And on the other side of things is you have to get a guy to be that option. And Paul George was that guy. This is the first player to change teams on a full-scale max contract without a sign and trade or without any strings attached since 2019. This does not happen that often, and it never happens in Philadelphia. That they're never the team that gets the guy. If you want to look back on the track record, I can make a real case right now, particularly in the modern Sixers history, because you can bring up a little bit of the ABA merger with Dr. J if you want to make that case, but not quite an apples-to-apples comparison. I think I can make the case that this is the best or most notable free agent signing in Sixers history. So, Paul George, welcome to Philadelphia, my friend.
Absolutely, man. It's been amazing to go back and watch highlights. I've spent a lot of time yesterday, over the weekend, kind of just getting to know what he is as a player at this point in his career. Still amazing, still fantastic. But as you said, this kind of thing just doesn't happen to the 76ers. Just so many things have gone wrong over the years, and so many guys have wanted to be elsewhere at certain periods of time. And at this point, we were able to not just get a fantastic player, but to have him decide to be here. Obviously, it is circumstantial. There were only so many teams, so many options that he did have, but he decided to come here nonetheless. Shout out to Daryl Morey and his cap space plan that was so coveted over the last however many months, 18 months, I want to say, is probably the amount of time that we've spent hearing about this cap space plan. And it did come to fruition. They still have a lot of work to do at this point. I'm sure we'll talk about all the different options out there, but they have the flexibility to do it, a couple of different ways that they can go about it. So not only did they get their big fish in Paul George, but they're going to be able to build up the rest of this roster, I think, intelligently, intentionally, and not handcuff themselves year over year. So it's been really exciting. I'm excited to talk about what's next.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to start right there with Daryl Morey real quick. That let the praise be as loud as the criticism often is with his. That you can disagree with the game that he plays, but you have to recognize that he's very good at that game right there. And there's some credence to why he thinks the way that he does think. And the biggest thing that I'm talking about is star hunting, that he is a guy that gets lost in the numbers, wants the all-stars, wants those type of guys, and does believe you can fill in the gaps with veteran minimums and those type of signings there. But I want to throw some stats at you, James Birrane, right here to start things off here. When talking about building a team around 3 stars, since 2012/2013, the chance a team reaches the conference finals nearly doubles, goes from 18.5% to 30.8%, when the roster boasts 3 top players compared to 2 top players. Now, those top players are defined as players who've made an all-star or all-NBA team within 2 years of the current season and played 29-plus minutes per game. The championship odds for those teams with 2 top players stands at just 0.9%, compared to 14% with teams featuring 3 top players. Every title winner since 2013 has rostered at least 2 alphas aside from 2 teams, that being the Nuggets with Nikola Jokic, and my quick timeout here being Jamal Murray technically never being an all-star, bit of a loophole here. I feel that he is a guy who has all-star caliber talent. He just kind of hasn't had it because of injury reasons, not playing enough games, all these type of things. And the other notable exception here, the 2020 Lakers, which was with LeBron James and Anthony Davis and no other third star. It also was a bubble championship there, to throw that asterisk. So if we're talking about increasing our numbers or our chances by that likelihood, you can sell me on that vision, Daryl Morey. And the point that I really want to bring up with this specific Sixers team, when looking at the Eastern Conference and the teams that they're going to have to beat, we're talking about the Boston Celtics, we're talking about the New York Knicks. They've very much leaned into this versatile, positionless wings that they're building rosters around. That it is, the Mikal Bridges, the Jason Tatums, the Jaylen Browns. The Sixers found a way to truly build a well-rounded roster. We're talking about Tyrese Maxey as a true guard, Paul George as a true wing, Joel Embiid as a true big man. And I think there's some real beauty in the way that this is built out. So just a round of applause to Daryl Morey is something that I want to start this off with.
100%. He had this plan in mind. He executed it up to this point. I still think that there's a lot of work to do on the table here, as we previously mentioned. Talking about the percentages and the increase in chances. This has been his MO since he's gotten here, even since that first year, talking about increasing their percent chance of making it to the finals or increasing their percent chance of winning the finals. And if you are in that frame of, or that range of whatever he said, 12 to 15%, you have to go for it, or every time, whatever it is. Daryl Morey has kind of been all over that. And obviously Paul George increases their title odds. It increases the talent on this team. He's always been a talent over everything kind of guy. Talent does win championships. This is the thing that drives the league. And Paul George fits that mold, man. He's towards the tail end of what I would assume is his prime. But what he does fits exactly between Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid. We've done this patchwork of trying to fill in the gaps between James Harden, or try to figure it out beyond Ben Simmons, or what works and what doesn't work. What we can all kind of lay our heads on at this point is Paul George is going to shoot 8 threes a night at 40% clip. He's going to play good defense on the wing. He's going to attack the rim. He shot, I think, close to like 70% at the rim last year, which is absurd. And
lower volume than the rest of his career, which I will say a little red flag there, but sure, the efficiency is still great.
And he's going to get isolation buckets. There's going to be times where Paul George is the guy that we go to, down the court, in the stretch, in the final minutes, in the final moments of a game. Paul George is going to be that guy. He's going to give them fantastic minutes throughout the season, praying for a healthy season for both him and Joel and Tyrese and everyone that's on this team. But he's not only just a highly talented player, he's one that fits basically perfectly within this system that they have going. And I'm excited to see what Nick Nurse has in mind for the three of them and what they're going to be able to do together, because not only is, Tyrese has grown as a 3-point shooter and has expanded his game beyond the 3-point line. There's iconic moments at this point from him. Paul George is one of the best catch and shoot and off the dribble 3-point shooters in the entire league at a high volume. So it's going to be fantastic to have two guys that do that with Joel Embiid as the center point inside the arc.
Absolutely. And the biggest difference is, you nailed it with that. It is with the catch and shoot. It is with the 3-point combination of volume and efficiency. Paul George last year shot 41.3% from beyond 3-point arc on 7.9 3-point attempts per game. To put that into perspective, Tobias Harris last year, 35.5% on 3.5 3-point attempts per game. That right there is just additional points that are coming into the Sixers right there. And the worst case scenario, if we're viewing this through super glass half empty lens here, if Paul George is just a super expensive spot up shooter and can do it at a high level, that's not the worst thing in the world. And I don't think that's going to be the case. I think he has more than that in the tank, but I will say that that's a pretty good baseline or floor to have for a guy as a player. So I did want to bring that up there. I do want to dive deeper into the basketball fit, as well as acknowledge the Andre Drummond signing, all the other moves that have come into this point. But before I get there, I just want to ask, for this process with Paul George, the courting ceremony, the meeting in LA, all this, when did it become real for you? Because it's very strange to me how we saw the Clippers breakup message in a way, and then you're kind of looking around the league. The Magic signing Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. It feels like it was Philadelphia or bust, but it didn't feel real until we got that 3:30 a.m. Woj bomb, which, by the way, I was trying to stay up for an immediate reaction. I lasted until about 1:30 a.m., and then I just pulled the plug, couldn't do it. finally came in at 3:30. So shout out to Woj for coming through. But James, my question being, what point in this entire process were you like, okay, Paul George is ours?
Yeah, I woke up on Monday morning, opened up my phone to Twitter. The first thing I saw was Kelly Oubre had signed with the Sixers, and my first reaction was like, great. Loved K9 last year. Super excited to have him back. I scrolled one tweet down and saw that the Paul George news had also obviously dropped, and that's, I think, the moment where I was like, all right, like, here we go. He's actually a Sixer. It's the natural, like, I don't want to say pessimist. I don't think I'm pessimistic, but maybe just the scarred version of myself that was not willing to believe it to be true until it was fully agreed to and signed. There was obviously, I think it was probably after like 7:30, 8 o'clock on Sunday evening where I was like, it seems like this is really the only option. He declined the option. The Magic went a different direction. The Clippers basically renounced him entirely and said, we're happy to see him go to a different team. There's nobody else. He wasn't signing with Detroit. That would have been the ultimate gut punch. But, I think it was after. Yeah, either one would have been devastating, but Detroit would have been worse, just on a different level. But
sure,
for him to really have his decision almost made for him, but then to find out, obviously, we've heard over the last couple of days that they were just kind of waiting on Dr. J and Josh Harris to get to LA to meet with them, and it got delayed due to weather and whatever it might have been. And it seemed like Paul George had made his decision by then. It was just about having the meeting and putting pen to paper. But really, it was that Monday morning wake up when I saw the tweet official that Paul George had signed, as well as Kelly Oubre, which I'm super excited about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to touch on Kelly as well. And just my last thoughts before we wrap up on the Paul George specific stuff. I see very clearly that he is the third banana here. And I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean that in a way. I think like there's been some Paul George comments that I haven't loved to come out of his mouth when talking about like what his priorities are and, him watching tape on Stephen A. Smith and Ryan Clark rather than like Derek Jones Jr. actually locking him up in the playoffs. Those type of things don't particularly rub me the right way. But I will say that with Paul George here is he does feel like he has that mentality where it's like he's not going to be a problem. And when you think back to like this Sixers era, like Joel, he's a weird kind of alpha, but he's all very clearly like the guy. And Maxi's been the fun-loving, like never going to be a guy to cause any type of issues. When you think back to these other pairings, like James Harden, it always felt like there was this passive-aggressive kind of beef for like the style of play that these guys wanted, but obviously the isocentric that Harden prefers versus Embiid, where he was kind of playing a pick-and-roll style, which he didn't even particularly love either. There was the Ben Simmons stuff, which there was certainly a clash for the entirety of their career there. Even the Jimmy stuff, there was a weird kind of just push and pull or tug of rope with who's in charge of this team or who's the closer type thing. I think it's going to be nice to have Paul George just kind of fit into this is the trio. These are the three. You are the third guy. And we don't mean that on a criticism. And the other part about Paul George is like we've seen it through his career that he is not a one. He's not quite built for that. And while he was absolutely cold when dating back to like the Pacers years and how talented he is, I just don't think he's built for that. And I even think you can make the case that he might not be capable of being a true number two. So I think this is like the ideal location for him at his point in his career as well.
And he mentioned that talking about playing the right way. I think, I don't think as other people can talk about it, and I'm sure that they will. I think as Sixers fans, what we should really digest it as looking at them playing off of each other. They're all going to benefit from one another being there. Paul George adding the elite spacing that he's inevitably going to bring not only helps Tyrese and Joel, but it helps Paul George get what he wants. He wants to shoot those shots. He wants to get those moments of isolation, attacking the basket off of closeouts. Joel Embiid is going to relish in the opportunity to have somebody to kick, a reliable player to kick the ball to that's going to hit those shots. The dribble handoff game. Tyrese is going to benefit from another high gravity player on the perimeter, and he's going to continue to grow and do his thing. I think that he's really going to be the motor this year. Obviously, Joel is going to be Joel at all points, but I think Tyrese should be the motor of the offense from start to finish this season, from day one to the end of the playoffs. I think he's going to be the guy that kind of handles everything. But Paul George is not going to come in here and decide to shake things up. He's going to be him. And what's nice about this situation is who Paul George is fits so nicely with them that whether you want to call him a 1A, a 1B, or a 1C, or a 1, 2, or 3 option, I really don't want to get caught up in the semantics of that. What I think we should all be paying attention to is how well he fits between them and how much he's going to optimize those two and vice versa. And, whether that was a huge part of his decision or not, I think it is going to be the reality, and they have a really good chance to not only like extend each other's primes, him and Joel, but really bring Maxey in as like kind of let him transition into being one of the best young stars in the league without having to put so much pressure on themselves, because he's proven not only to be great, but to be able to do it on a playoff stage as well.
Yeah, the hierarchy of these guys can certainly shift throughout their time together, which is not a bad thing. That is could potentially keep the window open even longer. But as you touched on, it can't just be Paul George. There's more work to be done with this roster overall. So we kind of covered the trio of Joel Embiid, Paul George, and Tyrese Maxey. We touched on Kelly Oubre returning. This is a great sign for me. I'm happy to have Oubre back. But something that was particularly noticeable to me is that initial tweet from Woj mentioned Kelly Oubre as the Sixers starting two guard. So your thoughts on that particularly, and just Kelly being back in general?
I love it. I really, really liked Kelly throughout the season last year. I loved what he brought to the table. It was surprising the type of player that he became with the Sixers and how much he responded to Nurse and Joel and Tyrese and all those guys in the way that he played. He really did become kind of the dirty work guy. He was willing to pick guys up 75 feet. He was willing to crash the offensive glass and be in the dunker spot. He was kind of willing to forego some of that selfish nature of his that had come up in other times. So I really appreciated the way that he played last season. And this is kind of a prove it, or it is a 1+1. So it gives him the security of, if he doesn't have a great year, he can come back. But it also gives him the opportunity to outplay his contract and get something bigger beyond this, which we can worry about that next July. But for next season, whether he starts, which it seems like maybe that was part of the deal, was like, hey, Nurse loves you, you love Nurse. His shooting or lack thereof doesn't really impact them when they have two really elite shooters in the starting lineup plus Joel. He can kind of find a role in this, and I think that he'll be great for them as a connecting piece defensively, as he was really, really great on that side of the ball, as well as somebody that will play a really strong and confident role on the offensive side.
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest thing about me, like, I was surprised and very excited by the version of Kelly Oubre that we did see last year. You're absolutely right about the dirty work. And I think I can even make the case that I do like the fit of Kelly Oubre with this version of the Sixers team than last year's. And one of the biggest reasons that I say that is that, like, when you think about him fitting into the context of this team, that there is like this smoothness with the way that Paul George plays. And there's like this rapid fire pace that Maxey, but he's still a little bit more of a finesse player. And even Joel is more of a finesse guy. Kelly's going to try and dunk everything. He's going to be like that aggression, that kind of counteraction, which I think really works kind of beautifully in that. I think like the two guard thing's really appealing. The bottom line, and we're recording this on Tuesday night, so could change a little bit, but they need a starting power forward for sure. So that's kind of the bigger question to me. Maybe you can play Paul George. Maybe there is a Dorian Finney-Smith trade coming, which there's been a lot of buzz about, although there's some salary implications that are really tough with that as well. But I do think it was interesting that he was worded as the starting two guard. I do think one of the things he unlocked in his game was like guarding smaller guys. Like I think he did a really nice job using his wingspan and length. Jalen Brunson is a prime example of in the playoffs. I thought Oubre did a really good job on, but very happy to have him back there. We also got a reunion to kick things off in free agency with Andre Drummond coming back to this team. So Drummond is a guy I will preface by saying I think is remembered in a little bit fonder light than probably should be the case, that we did not get to experience a playoff run with him. He was only here for half a season, a part of that Ben Simmons, James Harden trade that ultimately got the job done there. But he was very good during the stretch where he was the backup for Joel Embiid, and has put career best rebounding numbers over the past two seasons since leaving Philadelphia. This season particularly, he ranked in the 100th percentile in both offensive rebounding rate and defensive rebounding rate. So it does not get any better than that. Give me your thoughts on Andre Drummond come back to Philly.
Yeah, why would you trade Andre Drummond for multiple seconds when you could let him walk in free agency and sign him with a team that was going to trade for him? That's the real question to be asked. Thank you, Chicago. But when you look at Andre Drummond, I think that, like you mentioned, I didn't love him here. I liked him. Mm-hmm. But when you look at the current situation where essentially unplayable at times in the playoffs, and the stretch of time that Joel missed later in last season, so brutal, that when you get a guy that's not only like a high caliber back start, like a long-term substitute, he's a perfect fit in that sense, where I think they may have overpaid for the backup center position, quote unquote. It may be a luxury when Joel is healthy. Then we got to be, and that he is off the court isn't that they can survive those minutes and those games and those stretches where he's not available, or maybe even when he's just not on the court. So bringing Drummond back was, I think, a necessity. I think it's great. I think he loved it here. The fans really do love him here. And it's going to become something where, you know, you look at the end of last season and how poorly they rebounded and how frustrating it was at times. Like you just said, he actually might be the best in the league at that specific skill. So can't complain about that. I was happy to see him back. And I think even the more interesting piece is that probably means that we're saying goodbye to B-Ball Paul, which I'm sure we'll get into. Yeah. But that was like the first thing off of my mind. You drafted a backup center. I love Adem Bona, by the way. And you end up signing Andre Drummond within minutes of the first, the first pin to drop for the Sixers in free agency was a backup center. So that probably has implications beyond just the signing. But I do really like the Drummond signing. I'm happy he's here.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of my like pro B-Ball Paul campaign is I did like that he played a different style than Joel Embiid, that like I don't think there was a ton of value in rolling through the DeAndre Jordans and Amir Johnsons and Boban Marjanovic of the past that just were worse versions of Joel to an extent. Drummond's more so cut from that, but he's more talented than all those players that I just named there. And I did like that Paul Reed, it was an up and down ride. He certainly didn't take those next steps the way that we hoped. I do think the writing is on the wall, and there's basically 0% chance he's back next year. And to put up the full context in that, he's got $7.7 million on his contract. It is non-guaranteed, so the Sixers could waive him for free. They're being very conscious of the cap situation. What I think is much more likely right now is they are shopping Paul Reed or like to trade that contract, which I still think he's like, that's a fair market value for him. There could be teams that would be willing to pay that. But the other side of the coin is it's non-guaranteed to everyone. So they could hypothetically trade him to a team that is looking to free up some cap space. They can cut Paul Reed, and that's essentially a $7.7 million in cap relief right there. So the short answer to that is I don't think Paul Reed is coming back, and especially for the reasons that you did brought on. I know you were very excited about this guy following the draft, that Adem Bona from UCLA, he's very B-Ball Paul-like, that he is athletic, he's big, he's more disciplined than Paul Reed, I'll say that right now, that he's not going to do the wild out-of-control stuff. He's a little more basic skills of a center, that he's going to screen, roll properly, catch lobs, block shots, very good shot blocker. But talk to me about why you like him so much.
I actually think I would actually go back a little bit on that. I think him and Paul Reed are very different from each other in a lot of ways. Bona plays above the rim. He dunks everything. All he wants to do is dunk.
Yeah.
He's not as big as you maybe want a traditional center to be. He does height-wise lack that a little bit. Length-wise, though, he makes up for that. Super high motor. So in that way, definitely Paul Reed-esque, quirky. Offensively, definitely quirky in the way that he doesn't really necessarily play traditionally, and has this kind of high octane motor in a way that you really want the energy from a guy off the bench. Like you said, a little bit more disciplined in that sense. He's definitely more limited offensively. Like Paul Reed was able to kind of get into his bag, as we would say, and do different things that maybe sometimes you loved it, maybe sometimes you didn't love it as much. But I think that Bona is more of that traditional rim running lob threat on offense and a versatile rim protecting big on the defensive end. If you go back and watch, he's Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year, which I know might be a little bit watered down, but very strong on that. And really where he will make his money is being a defensive presence, because he's not just a standalone block-to-block rim protector. He's definitely capable and willing to stretch out to the perimeter, switch on to smaller guards, and use his length and speed and then rim protection and verticality to block shots at the rim. So I really was happy with that pick. I'm a UCLA fan, so obviously biased, but if they're willing to move on from Paul Reed and obviously have some sort of plan in place for maybe Joel to not play as many games, I do believe that they have, and I saw that there was a report today that they believe that he'll have a standard NBA contract. So what that means to me is that they expect him to play. This isn't just hey, we're going to take a flyer on this guy with the 41st pick and maybe he'll be the two-way. He's going to get a standard contract. He's going to be in the mix at times. And if Joel's not playing, he's going to be the guy that's playing backup center. So we will get a real, course of him this season to be able to see what he brings to the table. But definitely Paul Reed-esque in the quirkiness and unnatural basketball ability. But I think a lot different in terms of the athletic above the rim playing, because Paul Reed was rarely, blocking shots high above the rim or dunking on lobs. That's kind of like we don't like the fact that Paul couldn't really catch lobs. So same, but different.
And like he was pretty efficient at it, so I don't want to hate on him too much. But Paul Reed loved like the up and under finishes rather than just dunking it. Which, like, again, he did make it, and 2 points is 2 points. But I there's something about a dunk that just kind of you feel it a little more over the flow of the game. But that was a pretty good sell on Bona. A point that I would make is the Sixers pre-draft were attached to Yves Missy out of Baylor a ton, a guy who I just straight up prefer Bona to Missy, to be perfectly honest.
Really?
And they're very much cut from like a similar cloth as a player. I think Missy was even more like bare bones in what he did. He attempted one jumper during his season in college, and he's a guy who straight up like a Clint Capella 2.0 type guy. I think Bona can be a little bit more than that. I really do. So I think that was great use of a pick. Fantastic that he was on the board at 41. And one of the consistent things I continue to read and hear during the pre-draft process is that he had the highest motor of any player in this entire draft class, which I love. And my final point on him specifically is he's a dude that like is from Nigeria originally, spoke about how his brother's already a Sixers fan because of Joel Embiid. And that like, that was kind of a cool moment to me to see like how much like he idolizes Joel and kind of put that into perspective. Like what a hero Joel Embiid probably is to a lot of kids out there in Africa. And obviously we know Joel from Cameroon and his story for getting here, coming over to America when he was 16. So I think that all is kind of cool how this ties together. And he does just seem like a good kid who's going to come in and work hard. So very excited by the Bona edition and totally with you that this means the writing on the wall for our guy B-Ball Paul, unfortunately there. But another player, any last thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you fully. I'm happy to hear that you like him as well, because I'm definitely going to be all on board with that. But high character guy. Same thing with McCain. I know this isn't the draft podcast, but I think that the Sixers have been very intentional about the type of people that they're drafting. Maxey definitely included in that. And two of these guys that are very high character, really high motor, hardworking, just the track record of being gym rats. I love it. And I think that both of these guys maybe don't have like the super highest ceilings out of anyone in the draft, but definitely are guys that project as rotational players at the minimum, and guys that hopefully, within the next couple of years or next couple of weeks and months will be contributing at an NBA level.
Yeah, and we are going to circle back to Jared McCain in a second as we talk about shaping out the rest of this roster. But I do want to acknowledge Eric Gordon, the other free agent signing that is official at this point in time, a guy who cue the Daryl Morey only signs Rockets players jokes. I know that he kind of set himself up for that one, but in reality, I think this is a really good signing. On a minimum, he's a guy who had way more left in the tank than I expected last year. Every time I watched the Phoenix Suns, there were stretches where they straight up ran offense through him, and that's saying a lot when you're on a team with Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and Bradley Beal there. But he did more off the dribble than I'd seen from him in really years. That was very much his game when he first came into the NBA, and then he kind of evolved into just this like stationary three-point shooter. He's a guy who will launch from like distance, which I love to see and something that's appealing. He's also way more willing as a shooter than a guy like Buddy Hield, who that was the big critique last year. So I think in my eyes, he's essentially a little bit of a Buddy Hield replacement is likely the role that I see carved out for him. But what do you think of the Eric Gordon signing, and what do you see his role being on the Sixers team?
Value at a minimum, very high. He'll definitely play. He's definitely going to get minutes. He'll probably be that like 7th, 8th guy in the rotation. He's seasoned. He's been around forever. He's played in all the biggest moments in the NBA. He's one of those guys that what he is. And I think it's really important and valuable to have those guys on a team like this, especially when there are a lot of gaps to fill. And maybe while the roster isn't complete and there's a lot of turnover, I think it's important to have those vets and those guys that just take care of business. Eric Gordon is one of those guys. I think in my brain, he's been a lot older for a lot longer. He is 35, I believe. But to me, it felt like he's been 35 for like 5 years. So it feels like I thought I was going to look at his basketball reference and see that he was 40. But he definitely has some left in the tank. He's still a really high level. I think he shot like 38% from three last year on very good volume.
Yeah. Just 37.8. And by the way, sorry to interject here. He shot 41% from the corner, and that's his worst figure in over 4 years. That he shot over 50% on corner threes the past 2 seasons prior.
Wow. So he's going to get a lot of those shots, and that's been a premium, obviously, in the NBA, but it's been really important for Daryl Morey's teams as well, as they've always kind of had that guy, whether it was Danny Green, PJ Tucker loved to hang out there, and it's something that they missed maybe a little bit with Nick Batum did a little bit of that last year. but they didn't have a guy that like really made that their point for this season. So Eric Gordon will do a great job at that. He'll be relief on a lot of ways. And if you have these guys out there, when you're talking about Maxey, who shot at a really high level, Paul George, we're looking at 41% on high volume. We're looking at Eric Gordon, who does the same, Jared McCain, who projects as a great shooter. We're finally getting that archetype of player that just chucks threes around Joel. And we're finally kind of getting to that point where it all makes sense. So Eric Gordon, I think for his value, contract-wise, he's going to be great. I don't expect him to be the best player in the world, but I know that he's going to play his role and do exactly what's asked from him, which is high-volume three-point shooting.
Yep, and the Joel Embiid and 4 shooters on the floor recipe seems to be what the Sixers are leaning into, and they should. That is the answer. That is the direction, and they're inching very much closer to that. Now, a piece of the puzzle to that is a guy that we just mentioned in the 16th overall pick in this draft, Jared McCain. So I'm going to lead the way here. I'm very much a Jared McCain guy. He's an unbelievable shooter. He's a guy that, like, I know all the TikToks have become the rage all over the social media, the fingernails being painted and all that type of thing. If you had no clue about that, you would never guess it just by watching the dude play basketball. The dude is all effort all the time. He's like a leader of men kind of vibe to him that, like, you feel his presence as being like the guy leading a team. I think there is a world where he grows into like the long-term point guard for this team of the future. I do think that him and Maxey can share the floor together. That I get they're both a little small at 6'3", but McCain was a pretty good defender in college. I know he will have the size limitations. And the other part of that equation is that Maxey turned himself into a pretty good defender by the end of last year as well, which I do think opens things up for you to be able to play with this a little bit. The NBA player comp I've been given from McCain has been Fred VanVleet. And when you think about the type of success that VanVleet had under Nick Nurse, that's really intriguing to me. The shooting is going to be a skill that immediately translates, and the kid's got a really good head on his shoulder. So I'm in on the Jared McCain train. I do think that he's going to play like impactful minutes in year one. I'm not saying he's going to be the starter or even like a 6-man or anything like that, or closing lineups, but I think he's constantly going to be in the mix for this team in a way that is a really successful 16th pick. So what do you think of McCain, and how do you see his role filling up on this Sixers team?
Yeah, I agree with you on basically everything there. Again, something we touched on earlier. One of his notes is like just super high character, great leader, really important hard worker on the floor. He's a connecting piece with his teammates, and his role changed a little bit throughout the year. I don't watch a ton of college basketball, being completely honest with you, but from what I understand with McCain, is fantastic shooter, relentless worker. He's somebody that, going through, looking back, he's been working for this exact moment for a long time. So he understood his limitations as a smaller player. He's actually very strong. While he doesn't give that stature, he's strong base. He got a lot of shots off. He created space with that strength on the perimeter. And defensively, I think that'll be something that will help him become a solid defender. I think he might have some time to get there just at an NBA level. But he seems like he's willing to do it. He doesn't come in with any ego. I don't even care. I don't even care to touch on the whatever else, the ancillary pieces about, Jared McCain, the think pieces of people telling him what to do. It does not matter to me at all. So I don't even bother to touch it. I think that it's who he is. I don't mind at all. So shout out to him for doing that. Shout out to him for being the type of person that he is. I think it's going to be awesome to see him here. And, there's nothing like Maxey gets this fantastic reputation of just being the friendliest and brightest person in the room. I think matching that energy with Jared McCain and Kelly Oubre and Bona and these guys that they're bringing in, there's something to be said about great vibes in a locker room. Yeah, you see it with the Philadelphia Phillies. This is an important piece. I think it's great. And if he can come in and be impactful in year one, that's a hell of a pick at 16.
Yeah, and this might sound a little strange, but there's almost a weird part of me that, like, the fact that he's put up with as much social media abuse that has certainly gone his way already, and the fact that he went to Duke, did all these things, was as true to himself as he's seen all the time, like, that to me just spells out the kid is straight up built for it. Like, you're not going to rattle this dude. He's heard it all. He's heard all the comments, and he jokes about it himself. Like, even he did a nice sit-down interview with Lauren Rosen as kind of his intro to the Sixers, and he's like, I already know the memes that are coming. It's going to be Joel Embiid saying, Jared McCain, we need a 3, and it's going to be a video of me doing a TikTok dance on the bottom. Like, I've heard it all by now. So I almost kind of like respect, appreciate, and think that it's going to help his transition in a way. But the bottom line is he is a guy that's going to be a shooter for this team. He's going to translate right away. The shooting footwork that he possesses is like some of the best that I've seen. He's like constantly just ready. There's like almost a Klay Thompson like release that he has, the way that he's able to constantly set his feet. I do think we're going to be able to run pin downs to create just catch and shoot looks for this guy. He can take it off the dribble as well. He creates separation. He's just like, that's the defining trait. That's been one of my calling cards for like identifying prospects is I like a defining trait and I like that they can build off that. It's him as a shooter, and the Sixers are a team that need that more than anything. So shout out to Jared McCain there. My question to swing that into things is currently in the backcourt, it is just Tyrese Maxey and Jared McCain. I'm a little bit of the mindset that this team needs a true table setter, a true like legitimate point guard that can run an offense. Because even when thinking about the context of the trio of Paul George, Joel Embiid, and Tyrese Maxey, none of those guys are particularly excellent playmakers. So what's kind of your thought process on that? And how does it indicate like where do they need to build out from here with those two guys in mind?
Yeah. It's tough because I would love Lowry back. I think it would be that's something that's definitely out there. I'm sure that they're having conversations with him. I don't know what his priorities are. I don't know what the Sixers' priorities are, but I feel like that's definitely a viable and reasonable option for him. It's going to, again, depend on what they do trade market wise or just eating up some additional cap space of the remaining money that they have left. I also know that Tyus Jones is a free agent as well right now, which he's very fantastic. He's one of those guys I think probably will get maybe priced out of the Sixers range and I think that he probably would garner more minutes and time with the ball in his hands than what he would get here, but he would be a fantastic addition, whether that's like in a sixth man role or even like slotting PG and Oubre down and letting Jones play the 1/2. But it'll be interesting to see what they do because they definitely need to bolster up that guard rotation. They did that in a couple of different ways, whether they go with some veteran guys on a minimum or maybe overpay for a younger guy that has a lot left in the tank. They did that in a couple of different ways last season with obviously bringing Pat Bevan initially and then, getting Lowry on a buyout, getting Cameron Payne, in a trade as well. So they definitely have options to do it. I don't know exactly what it'll be, but I think probably the first option for me would be see what Lowry is going to garner in a free agency, kind of leverage the fact that he's going to be able to stay at home here, and hopefully he comes back.
I just wish he was bigger. Like I wish there was like, and to put something to bed real quick before I dive into this, the Ben Simmons chatter on the timeline. Everybody stop. And James, crazy? I know you were a Ben Simmons believer. That when we first started this podcast, those were some of our bigger fights. As I was always a Joel Embiid guy, you were always a Ben Simmons guy. I want absolutely zero part of Ben Simmons ever wearing a Sixers uniform again, even on a minimum. Are you on the same page as me?
Dude, isn't that crazy though? Like, can we talk about that for a second? Like,
yeah.
I mean, I don't want that to happen. Like, let's be real. It's not happening. Good. We're not doing that. It's just like I literally just talked like 5 seconds ago about how important like locker room energy is and how ridiculous that would be. Dude, what is going on? What's wrong with Philadelphia? What's wrong with these people? I honestly think what it is, and this is not going to come as like a shot to anybody. Like, I just don't think that there's like that much general NBA fans in like the Philadelphia core fan base. So when like big things like this happen, people start to just like latch on and welcome aboard, all aboard, please. But like then they're just like the first thing they think of is like, oh, Ben Simmons. And I think we're all good on that. I don't think that's going to happen. But thanks for the thought, though. I appreciate it personally as a Ben Simmons fan for all of those years. I appreciate that everyone's kind of back on board. But come on, let's be real for a second.
Yeah, I'm out on a guy who's played 57 total games over the past 3 seasons combined there. That's not what I'm signing up for. And I don't forget how painful it was to play 4-on-5 on offense, or a guy who shot 34% at the free throw line during a playoff series. I still remember those stuff. That didn't change, by the way. In fact, like the numbers all look worse. He shot below 50% from the free throw line this season for Brooklyn. He hasn't gotten better. He's still Ben Simmons. He refuses to get better. Let's close that door right now. But to move on from there a little bit, well, let's stay in the Philadelphia failure department. Tobias Harris, man.
Let's go.
$2 million. The boy gets paid once again. Terrell Harris, the greatest agent of all time. And Tobias Harris gets to fulfill his basketball destiny here. That the reality is his unfortunate basketball destiny is to score empty calorie statistics on a below 500 basketball team. He's the caliber of player who is not good enough to be a primary option and not good enough at the supplementary skills where he can rebound at a high level, defend at a high level. He can't do any of these things. I've never seen him get a loose ball or hit the floor for one in my life. But enjoyed Detroit. Those are my parting words to Tobias. James, your thoughts?
Congratulations, Toby. You did it again. I'm proud of you. I'm happy for you. And I am looking forward to never having to deal or think about it again. So long, partner. It's been a pleasure. Really hasn't, but I'm happy for him. He's familiar with Detroit. In his blood, he bleeds Pistons basketball. I believe this is who he is at his core. And I'm excited for him, man. It's good for him. It's good for him. Where's he from originally? Is he from that area?
New York. He's from New York.
I always forget that. Why do I always forget that?
I believe he's a Long Island kid. Yeah. Yeah, dude, I would love it if he plays for the Knicks. That'd be phenomenal. Let's get Tobias Harris to the Knicks. That maybe start that campaign. But yeah, all-time finesser, all-time bag chaser. Got to tip the cap at least the era. I cannot believe this man played like over 400 games in the Sixers uniform. It is absurd.
He's exactly what like that team needs, though, right? Like they need somebody that like can
no team
and will.
Needs a Tobias Harris. There isn't a team that needs a Tobias Harris.
There's a need for a Tobias Harris out there. There was like 3 teams that needed him. Them, the Spurs, maybe.
No, I don't see a world where he can help an NBA basketball team. I just don't.
He's going to help them go from 16 wins to 22. You don't understand.
That's true. That's true. I'll give you that one.
He's going to bring validity and an adult locker room presence. That's what he's going to bring to them. He's going to read a lot of books aloud to the locker room.
Yeah. Read books, talk some politics, teach
coffee,
them some
maybe some coffee. I think he's a big coffee guy.
Yeah, well
tell him the importance of an 8-hour sleep, a good night's rest.
Yes. I do. Detroit Revolution is coming. Watch out, NBA. Tobias Harris turning this franchise around. But a guy that it did hurt a little bit that we did see walk out the door, Nico Batum here. That's definitely the one that stung the most to me. I respect it. This is very clearly one of those where you got to factor in that these are human beings. They're not just basketball players. And it's clear Batum wanted to be with family out on the West Coast in LA. He was the ultimate professional when he was here. He turned out to be very important to this Sixers team, far beyond what the numbers indicate. I'll be wishing Nico Batum the best for the foreseeable future, but it does suck that he's not going to be back.
I'll never forget the 6 months of Nico Batum. And I'll never forget, although the stats may not count and the game actually does not exist in the NBA record books, the Nicholas Batum game against the Miami Heat will always have that. I really liked him. Honestly, I loved his game. I loved what he brought to the team. He was like so much fun to root for in a weird way. Like maybe one of my favorite Sixers role players that we've had in a really long time, maybe ever. I think he probably cracks my like top 8, I would say, for someone especially who was here for such a little amount of time. But good for him. I know that really, I don't think they ever wanted to leave LA, and it was kind of just part of the deal for him to come over here. I'm happy that he did and spent some time here and got to be with this team. But yeah, I think there was a report that the Sixers maybe at least match, if not gave more money to him or offer more money to him, and they decided to go back to LA. So if that's what he wanted, that's what he wanted. I'm happy for him. I'm glad he didn't go to like a team that's really super consequential to us, because he is an impactful player, even with his age. But shout out to him for getting paid and going back home.
Yeah, absolutely. And that does seem to be the read from everything I've heard as well, that from the Sixers side of things, if there was any sort of mutual interest, that they were going to do their best to make it work and for him to return. I know Joel liked him quite a bit, but you got to respect the guy's wishes, and ultimately he can go play out and retire as a Clipper, which is what he desires. So got to respect that day.
A lot of weird Clippers, Sixers. I don't know what's going on. It's been strange.
Very bizarre. Mo Bamba, another guy who the Clippers added there, which even have it. Yeah, no hate there. It was worth rolling the dice on Mo Bamba, but it's very just strange to me. A guy with a 9'6" standing reach and an 8-foot wingspan, who his 2 skills he probably struggles the most at are rebounding and shot blocking, is just crazy. But whatever. It was worth a shot. He essentially turned into a guy that a very good pick and pop option, but it was decided whether or not he was impactful for whether or not he hit his 2 3-point attempts per game that he would get. So the Mo Bamba experience didn't go as quite according to plan or as well as hoped there. But yeah, enjoy him out on the West Coast as well. Are there any names that you want to get into as far as potential targets from here, or do you want to save that for next time?
So in terms of like trades or free agents?
You can. The floor is yours, whichever you would prefer.
Kyle Anderson. Bring me more
No.
UCLA. Kyle Anderson can't shoot. I know.
Yeah.
It depends. There's a lot of guys out there I think are worth at least kicking the tires on. I know that there are certain players out there that seem unattainable. There's a lot of those Pelican wings that maybe people are digging into, which I would always, love. I think that's the archetype of player. What do you think about Jonathan Kuminga?
I like him. I don't think he's gettable.
So in this instance, I think maybe we just set the framework of what could be potentially options for the Sixers and maybe go name by name. Next time we'll have a better idea of who's available at that point too. But So Paul Reed, it's 125% of a player's contract that if it's traded out, they can take 125% of that contract value in.
I believe so. That changes. That's going to change with like the tax level and the aprons. The Sixers are eventually not going to be able to do that like this offseason, but currently, yes.
Okay. So in this case, I know Dorian Finney-Smith has been laid out there. I personally don't think that that's the smartest move for the Sixers just because he has 2 more years of 14.9 and 15.3. That's a lot of money to spend on Dorian Finney-Smith. Not that he's not good or not impactful, but that basically wraps things up for the Sixers offseason. They got a couple of minimums to give out, but that's the end all be all. Not that, and I wouldn't be upset about it, but I'm just saying.
I do like him. Yeah.
I do like him as well. And he would fit nicely at the 4. I think that they probably want to go maybe a bigger player at the 4. Does that seem right? Like they're going big, the starting 2-guard thing with Kelly. Then you have Paul George, who's 6'7", 6'8". You probably want to go somewhere in between the PG and Embiid height and weight scale at the 4. Do you think so?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And somebody who has like a rebounding skill that's like a very good rebounder is certainly high up on my priorities. It's pretty slim pickings for digging through what those available options are. I did see a little bit of love for a Dario Saric reunion, and that is a guy who could potentially. You're out on that one?
I want an athlete. Like honestly, I want someone that flies around the court and is going to like get up in the air for rebounds, dunk the basketball, baseline cut, offensive rebound. Like that's just not Dario. It's not that I don't like him, but we already have enough bigs that do what we need a big man to do. I want an athlete at that position personally.
That's fair. My pipe dream has always been Jonathan Isaac, but he just got paid by the Orlando Magic, and it does not seem like. Yeah, he got probably more than he should have been, although I still would make the argument that he's the pound-for-pound best defender in the NBA. It's limited sample size that he's more of a bench player, and he's obviously in and out, but that was my kind of pipe dream there. But that's the style of player I'm definitely looking for, is one of those guys that is, an athlete, long wingspan, tall, athletic. So I'm with you in that regard. It is slim pickings for who it is in that department, but I do agree with you and kind of categorically here.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think about this is not for the starting power forward, but Marcus Morris reunion, I feel like is potential. I think he is going to come back on a little minimum action. I like that, by the way. I'm not opposed to that at all.
And by the way, Mook was the only guy that gave that Cavs team any sort of life in the playoffs this year.
Yeah, like if he's the backup 4, like I'm not mad about that at all, to be completely honest with you. I don't know. I felt like I wasn't allowed to love him while he was here. I almost
we knew it was temporary.
Yeah. I felt I don't know. Kuminga, Kenrich Williams, they he's a little bit. I don't know how to describe where he fits with that Oklahoma City core. It seems like he's kind of on the outside looking in of maybe that rotation. There's so many guys on that team. He makes $6.6 million this upcoming year. What about another Clipper? I don't know if you're a guy. I don't know if you're a big Russell Westbrook guy. What do you think about Russell Westbrook?
No.
Table setter.
Yeah, but he can't shoot. Like we're gonna be doing. He's plays way harder than this guy ever has, but we're gonna do a lot of the same Ben Simmons type stuff. The appeal to Russ at this point in his career is you basically give him a second unit and just let him run. I think he ends up in Denver is what everything's pointing to in my mind. It could be worse. I'm not the biggest anti-Russell Westbrook guy, but I think we can do better than that.
Maybe. Just a thought. Sure. Anyway, so the thing is at this point, and the way I look at it is, if you're going to go get a guy that is going to start at year 4 and you think fits nicely, but maybe isn't super gettable, you have 4 first-round picks at this point to play with. You could go ahead and overpay for a guy if you feel like you need to at this point. Something I could also see them doing, and this is maybe the last thing I'll throw your way, is it's just there's been so many things flooding through the timeline at this point. I've seen a lot of people kind of throw out something of sign a minimum guy to start at your 4 or whatever it is, and balloon payment KJ Martin.
Yeah.
Keep your picks, and then be able to use his salary and maybe somebody else's to make a trade during the season once you kind of see how things play out. What do you think about that? And is that an option? It kind of feels like you're almost like, it seems like the safe way out of this offseason to just continue to push things back. I personally would like to see them make a definitive statement going into the season and say, this is our team right now, but it would give you options down the line. It keeps the door open a little bit.
I think that's the most likely route that occurs. I'm also like, KJ Martin grew on me last year. I'm not in a rush to get him off this team, and I think he makes a lot more sense, like in the context of what the team looks like now. When you have the Paul George, have guys that you can have 4 shooters, and then KJ Martin. Like, he essentially, I'm turned into a little bit of a KJ Martin guy, so I'm in favor of this plan. It does have to do with the bird rights, that he's a minimum against the cap right now, so you sign him for more than that, and then that's basically your tradable salary. He also, like, KJ getting a little, probably bag more than he deserves at this point, and also, like, probably the best case scenario for KJ moving forward is a different location than Philadelphia, because he is still 24 years old and playing through his mistakes. I'm not in a rush to exclude young talent from this team, so I do lean towards that direction a little bit more. And the other part to note here is, like, they're very much looking at most likely being a first apron team, which comes with a lot of restrictions from the trade standpoint. You just kind of hedge your bet a little bit by doing this. So I'm in favor of that plan.
Yeah, I could see that happening. It does feel like they have done basically everything they've sought out to do at this point, with Paul George bringing Kelly back, getting Drummond. You've done a lot of you've made up the bones of this team. You add some minimums in there, and then, you know, whether that's Morris or Lowry or whoever it is that ends up being those guys that maybe they give a little bit more than a minimum to, and then the balloon payment to KJ Martin, and you go into the season with 4 eligible first-round picks, a bunch of seconds, and a young player in KJ Martin whose salary is movable. Do you think it's imminent? Like, Paul Reed is going to get traded before the season, so, or he could just get waived.
Yeah. I the short answer is it going to happen before the season. One way or another here. I think ultimately he ends up traded. I think there's a little bit of value there that some team will take a chance on him, either for the financial reasons or just to have Paul Reed, because I do think there are teams that still like him. Like, he's absolutely still an NBA player, and there's a spot for him in this league. Yeah. So I do think that happens, but it does feel like a little bit conjecture right now. So I think we can wrap it up at this point here, that we will have a little bit more concrete to break down next week. But if you had to grade it, the offseason start so far, I can't go any direction but an A. How about you, James?
Feel the same. Absolutely. It's gone. Makes me happy, man. Makes me feel good. So, A.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Daryl, great job from here, and let's keep things cooking. Appreciate each and every one of you guys tuning in for this episode here. For those of you listening on the radio, on the other side, we will have another hour of Sixers talk with my guy Dime Dropper out there. A Clippers runs the Locked On Clippers podcast, does his own podcast out there. So very excited to dig into what he has to say about Paul George, the James Harden experience, and this weird parallel between these two teams. For everyone else, you can find that on the podcast stream or the YouTube channel as well. It will be posted by the time this is playing on air. So appreciate each and every one of you guys for tuning in once again. Make sure you're subscribing wherever you're listening, and I'll talk with you next time right here on Pick Swap Media. Peace.